Hey guys, welcome back to the Bulwark. It's me, Sam Stein, managing editor for the site, joined by Andrew Egger, who is the author of Morning Shots and our White House correspondent. As always, do subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's right there, little button, click, subscribe. We love it when we get those numbers up. It's very helpful. And then tell everyone about it. Today, we're going to talk about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a piece that we just published, Andrew and I, on the Bulwark. Explores a area of his conspiracy theory riddled mind that had not actually been explored until this point. We were able to unearth some new video taken early on in the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, in which RFK basically opens up to the idea that he believes that the pandemic was planned, that it was orchestrated by some nefarious government entity for the purposes of suppressing the populace. I know this sounds really wild, but he's there on the video saying it feels planned to him. So, Andrew, I want to talk to you about this because honestly, I went down a lot of rabbit holes with RFK Jr. I thought this one stood out because this was kind of different than the other conspiracies. This was about him not saying that COVID was an accident or that we, messed around too much with bioweaponry and this happened because of shenanigans in the Wuhan lab. It was him basically saying that the government may have orchestrated this whole thing for some sinister, nefarious means. That's what stood out to me. Did anything in particular stand out to you?
Yeah. So, 2020 was a banner year for conspiracy theories, right? I mean, everybody was locked inside. The world seemed like it was falling apart around us. Things were really crazy. And like from the get-go, like lockdown started in March 2020, and already, just days after that, you have people behaving like lunatics online over all this stuff. Saying Bill Gates was behind all of this. Saying it had all been cooked up. In an attempt to sort of seize control of the World Health Organization and global health in general. These are just random people online, right? But what's weird is like in the early going, even people like Donald Trump, like said a lot of things that were like super controversial, and we're talking about injecting bleach and things like that, but like was also trying to get certain amount of public health information out there and everything like that. Meanwhile, here's video of RFK already by the summer of 2020. I mean, plainly has been mainlining this stuff, like the most uncut, the hardest core of the hardest core online, like pure conspiracy mongering stuff. And is just talking about it.
Yeah.
You guys heard about this? You guys heard about
it? So the setup here is he's in Germany opening up a chapter of his group, the Children's Health Defense, and he just gets to talking about the pandemic. And let's play the video for you.
Many people argue that this pandemic was a plandemic, that it was planned from the outset, that it's part of a sinister scheme. I can't tell you the answer to that. I don't have enough evidence. A lot of it feels very planned to me. I don't know. I will tell you this. If you create these mechanisms for control, they become weapons of obedience for authoritarian regimes, no matter how beneficial or innocent the people who created them.
All right, so that's the setup. He's basically like, and the irony here is that this is all under Trump, right, who has now appointed him to run the Department of Health and Human Services. But he's basically saying that this is an excuse to, I don't know, like what, get people scared so that you can then spend millions and billions and trillions on bioweaponry and suppress speech and pad the pockets of the pharmaceutical companies who are your donors and on and so on and so on. And it's just rabidly paranoid. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is a rhetorical two-step that you see a lot from people who have a bunch of their audience in kind of the conspiracy brain space, where you sort of gesture toward, many people are saying,
I don't know.
And really, there's no way that a rational person could determine whether or not these things are true. But here's what I can say, and then you kind of make some other point that's somewhat less insane. So you have that kind of plausible deniability.
Right. What stood out to me? Yeah, what stood out to me was the line. A lot of it feels very planned to me. And that suggests that he believes that it could be planned. and therefore, he's thought about this in his mind. And elsewhere in this speech, he goes in sort of much more elaborate detail about what planning would look like, and then he draws these historical parallels between the Nazis testing vaccines on the gypsies and the Jews.
The Nazis did that in the camps in World War II. They tested vaccines on gypsies and Jews.
He says public health efforts are, quote, a pharmaceutical-driven biosecurity agenda that will enslave the entire human race and plunge us into a dystopian nightmare.
It's the product of a pharmaceutical-driven biosecurity agenda that will enslave the entire human race and plunge us into a dystopian nightmare where the apocalyptical forces of ignorance and greed will be running our lives and ruining our children and destroying all the dreams and dignity that we hope to give to our children.
I mean, yes, I agree. It's a rhetorical two-step, but it's also just sort of batshit.
No, 100%. I mean, like, you put in that stuff about the sort of just asking questions, right, in order to have the plausible deniability. But like I said, it is very plain that he has been just marinating his brain in this stuff all that summer. And this is long before it's after COVID has started to get politicized, right? Because after all the lockdown fights that really kind of drove people to their corners had happened already by that summer. But it's long before, any kind of controversies over the actual vaccines. It's long before.
I don't even think the vaccines were online at that point. There was still Operation Warp Speed. Yeah,
Operation Warp Speed had been spun up, and they actually did have the vaccines already sequenced and were in early testing by that summer. But as far as we knew at that time, they were still question mark distance away. Turns out they were on site within 9 months or so, or 6 to 9 months after that, which was amazing, which cured the pandemic. Hello, all these people. I mean, like, this is the craziest thing about all this stuff to me is like we're now in this, like we're digging up this stuff that like RFK had these brainworms already in the summer of 2020, whatever, and he's going to be in like a really prominent place, and that's so dangerous. But also, like, this is the stuff that has become totally commonplace, like on the right now, despite the fact that like Donald Trump's one amazing accomplishment out of all his accomplishments in office was Operation Warp Speed.
Well, I will just say there is a distinction that I drew here when we were writing this speech, which is that a lot of this has been mainstreamed in Republican politics, right? Anti-lockdown, anti-masking, anti-social distancing, anti-vaccine mandates, like that. And then, of course, on top of that, there is a growing acceptance of the idea that, in fact, this was not a human, an animal to human disease, that it was, in fact, a leak from the Wuhan lab. All of that RFK believes as well. But what he's doing here is he's going a step further in the conspiratorial mindset. And he's saying, in fact, it's not all sort of totalitarian government and overreach. It's deliberate malfeasance. And he's saying almost government-sanctioned violence against its citizenry because, I mean, the CDC's data suggests or says that 1.2 million Americans died from this pandemic. And RFK's implication is that was simply a cost that some nefarious government's actor was willing to incur in order to, I don't know, create this biosecurity state. I want to play one more clip that we dug up. It's a totally separate speech. He's in Huntington Beach. This is in 2021. And this sort of gets to this. I mean, the reason I thought this was kind of a fascinating clip is because it's not that this is just COVID to him. He's charted out this through line that starts at the Cold War and goes to modern day politics, in which basically the CIA and some nefarious state actors are constantly trying to find ways to gin up fear and suppress populations, and that they settled on bioweaponry and biosecurity because that's something that you could always go to as something to be fearful of. Now, look, the CIA is fucked up, right? They've done a lot of shitty, horrible things. Like, I don't want to become a CIA apologist, but I feel like RFK Jr. is kind of pushing me in this direction. They're fucked up and they've interfered in foreign countries and done horrible things. But some of this stuff seems totally out of whack. And so I think we should just listen to it uncut.
We do lockdowns, we do masking, we do social distancing. We put the entire globe under house arrest. We create and all these people who are doing it, and every one of them, there are CIA people who are psychological warfare experts. And they're using the same techniques that the CIA has been using for 80 years to destroy indigenous cultures by causing social chaos, causing loss of identity, causing loss of income, and coming in with a powerful central government and asserting powerful controls. All of those, that's what they were drilling. And these were signaling exercises. These were exercises where they were bringing people in who are powerful people, senators like Sam Nunn, Gary Hart, all of these other, CIA, all of them had CIA officials, they all had NBC, ABC, Forbes magazine, Bloomberg, people participating, and they were all told, this is how you handle a pandemic. This is the only way to do it. Social controls, totalitarian rule, keep everybody under house arrest, and in a hostage crisis, to inspire, to induce a psychological state that is technically known as Stockholm Syndrome, where the entire nation is rendered helpless, grateful to their captors, believing that the only hope for salvation is through utter obedience. And that is a psychological warfare technique.
I mean, if you saw someone on the corner of a street saying this shit, you'd be like, this person needs help, right? I feel like it just is so paranoid.
Yeah, and I mean, yes, 100%, incredibly paranoid. I know it's not really the point, but like, this is a speech that came out in summer of 2021, right? Like the pandemic was just fresh in people's memories at that time. Like, that's not what happened. Like, there was no like central bureau of control that was like sending down diktats from the federal government about like who was going to be allowed to go outside. It was a completely federalist system. States made decisions, cities made decisions. There was all kinds of controversies about the fact that different states and different cities were doing different things. The people who are listening to him, like, they lived through it. How is there anybody in this room who's like, yeah, that's exactly what happened?
Also,
I remember it was just like what the CIA did in Nicaragua or whatever. You know, it's
also, let's not forget that July 4th on the White House lawn, the Biden administration infamously now declared like the summer of like freedom from the pandemic.
America's headed into a summer dramatically different from last year's summer. A summer of freedom, a summer of joy, a summer of get-togethers and celebrations.
And then another wave hit and we were just totally fucked. But like, it wasn't like politicians were eager to keep the lockdown going. If anything, it was very clear that there was a major backlash to it. So no, it's madness. And he did say, I just want to summarize that what happened after the Cold War, this is the thread he draws. I'm going to try to summarize it without seeming totally insane.
Good luck.
Thank you. Here we go. After the Cold War, we were supposed to have a peace dividend, give all the money that we're spending in our confrontation with Russia. We're going to use it on domestic needs. And someone somewhere decided, no, we can't do that. We need that money for the military-industrial complex.
There were a cohort of people, part of that complex, when they heard peace dividend, they thought that money's coming out of our pockets. And we need to keep building the weaponry.
World Trade Center bombing happened. Don't know if he suggests that was planned. It may have been. And then the second one happened. And, again, he's suggesting maybe that we did that because we knew we needed to, fight overseas in the war on terror.
The first World Trade Center bombing happened. And all that money that was headed for the civilian use suddenly was in a screeching halt. And it began being redirected to to Islamic terrorism. And then, 7 years after that, we have the bombing of the World Trade Center, and huge amounts of money start pouring into that space.
But then someone decided that the war on terror was not going to be an effective tool for generating all this money because people would just figure out that terrorism wasn't killing that many people and wouldn't be scared of it.
After 9/11, on average, Islamic terrorism was killing fewer Americans every year than lightning strikes. And how long can you keep people saying, yeah, we're going to give 50% of our budget to something that kills fewer than Americans than lightning?
And And that's why we had the anthrax scare in 2001. Again, this is Bobby Kennedy, not me. This is me summarizing Bobby Kennedy. The anthrax scare in 2001 was designed to make people fearful of bioweapons, which would be a constant fear for the public. And then, of course, it turned out that the anthrax was coming from FBI offices, which, of course, to him signaled that it was a plant.
Saddam Hussein said that he's got this huge weapons of mass destruction, these bioterrorism weapons that he's going to come after us, and we're all vulnerable. That's why we got to go get him. Well, then we went, and anthrax was the reason. But a year later, the FBI had done its study, and it acknowledged that anthrax they fingerprinted. It came from one of 3 U.S. military labs, DSL labs.
I can't do my justice.
And they go, the aristocrats!
Watching movies with my kids.
Oh, man, I tried my best to summarize it. Okay, let's spin it forward. So he's now nominee for HHS. You've talked to a few people in the field. What do they think about this?
Yeah, so like just to pull it back a little bit, because like look at the crazy man talk, right? Like, haha. Right. I mean, it is kind of like there's like a fascination with it, but like this guy has been nominated to be put in charge of a very important arm of the government, Health and Human Services. I mean, like he will have a lot, if he's confirmed, he will have a lot, or if he's recess appointed in, he will have a lot of discretionary authority to, exert a lot of personal control over all kinds of stuff, authorization for new drugs, certainly new vaccines, but also the ability to monkey with, a lot of existing authorizations for vaccines. He has said that he thinks it's a bad thing that there's kind of a separate vaccine safety protocol where you can't like sue vaccine manufacturers in civil court, which was implemented back in the 80s in order to basically make it so that vaccine manufacturers would not board up and stop manufacturing vaccines because of the sort of death of 1,000 cuts of frivolous civil lawsuits. And yeah, I mean, we both talked to a number of public health people over the last couple of days who are basically like, just kind of at a loss, just kind of like dismayed at like thinking back over the real, genuine, amazing human progress in the field of vaccines over the last century, over the last half century even. I was talking to a guy, Paul Offit, who is a pediatrician and a vaccines expert at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. He's one of the developers of the rotavirus vaccine that's currently used. That your kids probably have that rotavirus vaccine. And he was just talking about how, like, in his lifetime, polio has been eradicated. Like since he's been practicing, he was like rattling off a bunch of bacteria that I can't name and I don't need to really know about because they aren't really around anymore because we vaccinate for them now and kids are not getting sick with them, going into the hospital with them. He's like, look, we've had all this progress. People don't want to trust the experts as a rule in the 21st century. This is something he said. He's like, trust the experts, trust us, we're the experts. That's not really a case that makes sense to anybody. But if you just look at the diseases that we no longer have and the diseases that could very easily make a resurgence. I mean, he was just like, you could just like hear the sort of dismay and defeat in his voice as he's talking about, are we really going to just throw all this stuff away for no reason just because of a bunch of nonsense? A guy with a worm in his brain has been placed in a position of power to make these calls. I mean, it's really bad news.
Yeah. And I will say, I talked to Dr. Peter Hotez, one of the premier infectious disease doctors. He's out in Baylor College School of Medicine. And he made the point in that it's not just like what Kennedy has said, it's what will happen under Kennedy's watch. And he said, look, there's H5N1 affecting livestock cattle in the Great Plains. We've had severe illnesses. We had someone who ended up in the ICU in British Columbia. We have, the possibility of another outbreak of some sort of coronavirus in the next 10 years, huge uptick in mosquito-borne transmitted diseases and viruses. It's like we can't afford to have someone who is, as he said, quote, a person easily prone to conspiracies. We can't afford to have that person in charge at this moment, because it's not like these things are getting somewhat like eradicated forever. In fact, we're going to have to deal with more mosquito-borne illnesses as climate change continues to progress and things like that. And so there's real concern about this. And yet, we're at this political moment where there's incredible support for what Kennedy is offering, the anti-expert posture that he represents. So it's troubling. All right, Andrew, thank you so much, man. Appreciate it. Everyone should check out the piece on the Bulwark. And as always, please do subscribe to the YouTube page. We'll see you later.